Good morning. Before I start, thank you. Something has happened over the last few weeks that was totally incidental and completely by accident and touched me and moved me profoundly. 3 service weavers in a row talked about today's service and referred to me as our very own Rob Corbett. I feel I belong and I feel at home, and I want to thank you for that. Today we're talking about story and truth. And before we do, I want everyone to think, before we start the Time for All Ages, I want everyone to think about a story you love. Don't overthink this. The first one that comes to your mind. And, it's like, oh, I really love that one. But this one, go with Mo. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Choose a story you love. Whether it's a fairy tale or a book you've read, or a family history, some story that you love. And now I want to invite you to take a second and think about why you love that story. I'm going to give you a second. Why do you love that story? Why is that the one that popped into your brain? I'm going to read a story that Rev Sally sent to me when I said I was going to be talking about story, and I love it. And it talks about truth and story. So for today, I would suggest that if we could define truth and story like this. Story is the thing that happened. If I may use an example, this morning this is not a complex story, but the main character is brilliant. This morning, we all saw Christina come forward and light a candle. That story, a thing happened. The why, the truth, is what we draw from that. When we look at our chalice in a flame, what does that mean? It's going to mean something different to all of us. There was once a beautiful woman who used to walk through the streets of the town, and everywhere she went, she was noticed. Everyone in town wanted to talk to her, listen to her, ask her questions, and spend time with her. In the same town, there was a poor woman dressed in rags. She too was very beautiful, but no one ever noticed her or wanted to have anything to do with her. She was lonely and sad. She would gaze at the beautiful, finely dressed woman and see how much attention everyone paid to her, and she wished so much that people would pay attention to her. She had so much in her heart that she wanted to share, but no one would listen. So one day, the poor woman in rags plucked up the courage to speak to the beautiful lady in fine clothes. "Please," she said timidly, "excuse me, but may I ask you a favor?" The fine lady, who was a very kind person, turned around at once and smiled and said, "Of course. What can I do for you?" "Well," ventured the poor woman, "it's like this. You are very beautiful and finely dressed. Everyone takes notice of you. But I am poor, and I have no fine clothes, and no one ever notices me. It would make me so happy if for just one day I could hide myself inside your blue, beautiful cloak and walk around with you through the town. Then, whenever people stopped to notice you, they would also be paying attention to me. I think I have something important to tell them that they would value, if only they knew." The fine, elegant woman readily agreed to the poor woman's request. So the very next morning, she wrapped her fine cloak around the poor woman, and they walked through the town together. Everywhere, as usual, people stopped to admire the fine lady, and when they did so, they also paid attention to the poor woman wrapped in the fine lady's clothing. As they walked, the fine lady talked with the poor girl. She asked all about her. She was very interested in everything she had to say, and she discovered just how wise the poor, ragged woman actually was. And they quickly became the best friends, and they are so to this day. And they never parted. To this day, they walk through the world together. The names of the 2 women are Story and Truth.
We invite our children to follow Kim and Reb Sally into the Rainbow Room for programming, or you're welcome to stay out here with your folks or caregivers if you prefer.
here I stand with my cue cards like high school speech. We all tell stories. It's not something we do because we are Unitarians or because we are Canadians or because we live in 2026. We tell stories because we are human. It comes back to the deepest roots that define us as people. I don't care where your ancestors came from. Let me rephrase that so I'm not misinterpreted. I deeply care where your ancestors came from. Our roots matter. But wherever they came from, your ancestors and mine spent their evenings sitting around fires, communally telling stories. It defined us as people. And we also told stories privately around hearths. Stories make us who we are. There's been some studies that we are the only species that tells stories. Other animals communicate. Monkeys, for instance, have certain cries that mean, look out, there's a lion. Others cries mean, look out, there's an eagle. But they don't have cries that say, do you remember that time when the lion fell in the water and we all got away? That seems to be uniquely human. It makes us who we are. I think that what we do culturally as storytellers, we also do individually. We all know, or most of us know, and are familiar with the fact that the things we tell ourselves about ourselves are deeply important. It's important that we tell ourselves powerful, uplifting things. When I was younger, there were two things I constantly told myself. One of them was, I can't remember names. And the other one is, I never finish anything. Years ago, I decided to stop telling myself those things. I started telling myself, names are challenging, but I can get them. Can't I, Luann and Christina and Nisha, right, and Wendy? I can get there. Don't get me wrong, I am grateful for name tags. I am deeply grateful for name tags. Nathan and Anne and Keith. But I can remember names. And I don't finish everything. But I do finish some things. I finished this shirt. Carlos, if you will, this is me at 7:30 this morning, finishing this shirt so that I could make this point. And as we were in huddle, I realized, in the spirit of full disclosure, I am not quite finished. I forgot to sew in an end. So apparently I don't finish everything, but things do get finished. What we do about the things we tell ourselves, I want us to dig just a little bit deeper. I want to suggest that we could go a little deeper and look at the stories we tell each other and the stories we listen to. And, I think more importantly, the meanings we draw from those stories. When I was a kid, my very favorite story was a fairy tale, and it was all about this person who was in a really, really tough situation, and someone showed up and helped. And everything turned out so beautifully. They were not finished with challenges. There were still problems, but things worked out with a little leg up, with a little help from someone who believed in them. A couple of years ago, for a project I was working on, I went back and revisited a lot of those childhood tales, and I found one I really, really did not like. I was looking at fairy tales, and I found this fairy tale about, the message was about how we as people, and if I may, particularly women, really aren't very valuable until they got a good dress and an uncomfortable pair of shoes. Carlos, can we see this? So there are the pictures of the two stories. You can see the one on the left there is, sorry? Oh, yes. So we've got a picture of a woman in a beautiful dress, and there's another woman waving a magic wand. Behind her is a pumpkin and a carriage that used to be a pumpkin. And the shot and they are the same shot. The story on the left is about a character who was in a really rough situation and someone came by and helped, found their real worth. The story on the right is about how women ain't worth nothing until they got a good dress and an uncomfortable pair of shoes. The same story has multiple meanings. I want to invite you to rethink some of the stories you tell. One of the things that drew me to this congregation and UUism as a whole in the early days of me attending was how we as a congregation are open to re-looking at the stories. When I was in high school, I was told a story. It went like this. In 1492, and for a few centuries later, brave explorers came from Europe and found a new undiscovered land, which they explored and conquered. That was the story we were told. And the meanings were fairly clear, although often never expressly stated. And the reality is that now, I still believe the story. I wasn't there, but I do believe that in 1492, ships showed up at Turtle Island with people who didn't know this place existed. I still believe in this story, but the meaning I draw from it is vastly different. I think that what we do as a culture, we can do as individuals. Today I want to focus on what do we draw from our stories. Oh, I just did that. If I may use an example from my own life. Some time ago, someone who I love dearly, someone who I believe loves me dearly, and someone who may or may not be here today, did not do something he said he would do. That was the fact. And the story, the meaning I drew from that was every single freaking time. I'm saying freaking because I'm in church. Every single, this is just like that last time, and the time before that, and all those other times, and no one can be counted on, and I'm alone, and nobody loves me. That was a mess. It took me a little while. I want to say this was a very quick proposal. It actually took a while. I eventually started looking at that with a slightly broader lens. And I'm going to suggest that if we want truer stories, we need to look from a slightly broader lens. When I was taught in high school that brave explorers came and discovered a new world in 1492 and all the years that followed, we needed to believe certain things. We needed to look at that story from very specific perspectives in order to buy into the narrative that was being told. We needed to not look at other people's perspectives, and we needed to get really close to the story. When we pull out, when we look at different perspectives, when I look at that event, and I do have permission to tell this story from the person it involves, when I look back at that event, from a little distance, I realized I've known this person for 6 years, and yes, in 6 years, 3 times, they have let me down. And they have not let me down hundreds of times. That story links back to all the times I was let down. And in order to buy into that narrative that no one can be counted on, I can only focus on those parts of the story. When I get a slightly broader perspective, I see that hundreds of people over the course of my life have been there to help me, have shown up when I asked, and sometimes when I didn't ask because they knew I needed something. When we pull back a little bit, when we give ourselves a little more perspective, we get a clearer picture when we look at another perspective. When I look at those 3 horrid incidences when I was let down, there was a lot going on. There were very distracting times. I'm not for a second suggesting that every time we pull back, it leads to renewed relationships. And sometimes you pull back and you realize, this is a relationship I should not be in. That's the thing that happens. But we get clearer pictures when we move out a little bit. When we think about the stories that resonate with us, I think they're trying to tell us something. One of my favorite people in history was a man named Carl Jung, early psychologist. And he said something interesting. I'm an unapologetic romantic. And he talks about romance. In this particular instance, he is talking specifically about romantic relationships. And he says, we are drawn to the people, subconsciously, we're not aware of this, but we are drawn to the people who will force us to face the parts of ourselves that we don't want to face, but we need to. The parts that are undeveloped, the parts that are broken, the parts that are wounded, the parts that are absent. When I look at the relationships in my life, I see that I am drawn to people who make me better if I let them. What Carl Jung says about romantic relationships I think it's true about art. Do you ever go to a film with someone who you think thinks like you, and you love the movie and they did not? Because different things speak to us. There are all kinds of ways to tell stories. We get stories in music, we get stories in art. Some of us are going to look at the art in the room and we're going to love Christina's pieces at the back, and others are going to love Lauren's piece over here. Why do certain pieces pull us? Why do certain stories keep coming back? Why do moments from our past keep coming back to us? I believe they're trying to teach us something about ourselves. Excuse me while I have a light bulb. One of my favorite stories as a child was about a person who got help when they needed it. And one of the reoccurring stories that I have in my life is, no one is ever here to help me. There's an interesting parallel there that I will explore later, but not right now, because we don't have time for it. The stories that come back to us. In 2 weeks, we are having a service on asking for help. I was excited, now I'm really excited about that service. How do we ask for help? It's something I'm not good at. And I'm with someone who helps me, who's good at asking for help. We are drawn to the things that are trying to teach us something. The stories we tell ourselves and the meaning we take from them are gifts to our future selves. We carry stories from all sorts of places. When I was young, my parents were devoutly, what's the word I'm looking for? Cheap. They really, really were. I got my first new pair of clothing when I was in my teens. I lived in hand-me-downs, and a lot of those hand-me-downs fit, but I was the youngest of 3 boys, and we had friends who were just older than I am. Sometimes those clothes needed to be altered, sometimes they needed to be recuffed, sometimes they needed to be thrown out. I think we carry stories that are often handed down to us. I want to encourage you and invite you to look at them. Do they fit? Should we be drawing different meanings from them? Do they need to be altered? Or do they need to be thrown out? And if you can't throw them out because they're just too beautiful and they mean stuff, could I suggest you hang them in a museum in your mind where they sit there beautiful? I love old maps, but I don't follow them. When I have to get to Kingston this afternoon, I am not following an old map that is 300 years old to get my way to Kingston. They're beautiful, but they're inaccurate. They don't work anymore. We've got better perspectives. I want you to think about the stories that you tell yourself, the meanings that you take from them, and what they give to your life. Because the stories we tell today to ourselves are gifts to ourselves in the future. And that is my last card. We have more control over our narratives than most of us think, because the narratives and the stories we tell make us. If any of this resonates with you, I am glad. If it does not, please know that the opinions expressed in the preceding talk are those of the participant and do not reflect UUism, Reverend Sally, or even myself in a few weeks. The only thing I know for sure is that I'm probably wrong about something. Thank you.